Hey,
Let's do it. Hold on. Oh,
hi there. This is Billy Tarasio with the Modern Divorce Podcast, back again with attorney Darren Colbert for our latest episode on what's going on with celebrity divorces. Today, we're taking a little bit of a different turn and we're going to talk about Britney Spears and the Free Britney movement. This, of course, has been fueled by the latest New York Times documentary that has aired on Hulu called Framing Britney.
mhm.
Darren, how you doing? And welcome to the show.
Good. I'm doing great. I watched the documentary last night. Um, Brought me back to the good old days, you know. But I lived, I grew up in the '90s when Britney was a huge star. So
Absolutely. And
yeah,
I'm really so I was as I was thinking about us recording this, it's really interesting because I'm 40, Brittany's 39. So we're the same age essentially, and you are 30, right?
31, about to be 30.
31.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
we've got an interesting and different perspective probably on what it was like in the 90s for Britney. How you saw Britney might be different from how I saw Britney. And one of the most interesting things about this documentary was looking back at what we all remember and just sort of cringing, right?
Yeah. No, the cringe is so real. That was the word that I would use. The other thing is I don't remember noticing the cringe back then. I mean, obviously, I was a lot younger, but as far as I mean, some of the questions that she was getting asked during interviews. I mean, my wife and I literally needed to rewind it at one point because the interviewer asked her about her breasts, and we were like, did did that really just happen? Like, I mean, it's so inappropriate. But yeah, that's exactly what happened, and she was obviously very uncomfortable. And I think you pointed out in a prior discussion about this old guy asking her when she was like 8 if she had a boyfriend. Oh, what about me? I mean, it's just all just bizarre and weird. I do remember, the music videos and all that stuff. So, and I definitely had a crush on Britney. There's definitely, that aspect of it. I remember her and Justin Timberlake and all of that kind of drama. Um, but looking back on it, it's very, very, very cringy.
It's
Hmm.
cringy, it's sad, it's despicable. Like part of our culture is just I think there's sort of this collective like remorse that we feel for how we treated Britney, but it's simply not that simple. You know,
Right.
it's a complicated thing. She was pushing a lot of buttons and a lot of boundaries, and who knows how much of that was her and how much of that was the machine behind her that was profiting from her. But she
Yeah.
took the brunt of that.
She did, and I mean, imagine it. I mean, she started her career as an entertainer basically from a very, very young age. The documentary walks us through that process, and she came from a very kind of poor background, so to speak, and to the point where like trying to get her a voice coach was um, challenging financially for her parents, and even like traveling to meet with some of these people was financially challenging. And there's just so many things that I mean, it's hard. There's so many different things to talk about. Um,
Right.
to kind of piggyback on something you said, one thing that stuck out to me was one of the statements from a potential lawyer. We'll get into that later, but he said, "Look, we don't know what we don't know." Uh,
Again and again, he said that.
yeah, and that really stuck out because it's entirely true. Um, there's a lot that we do know, right? Because she's been in the public eye for decades, and they got into the paparazzi and all of that, which I think is worth discussing. Um, but there's also a lot that we don't know, and that's going to apply to her conservatorship and her family law case and situation. Really, her mental condition. It just really, but the situation is on its face bizarre enough that
Oh,
it's created this whole movement of people that want to free Britney. So
I certainly want to free Britney. Don't you want to free Britney?
Yeah, I didn't even know that Britney was not free, to be honest. And I think a lot of people, a lot of people were unaware of her situation prior to this documentary. So I guess it makes sense to kind of start there, because I'm sure everyone remembers when she shaved her head, right? And there was kind of this, and I remember that as a kid. I have no idea what age I was, but I would have been young, and I remember that and kind of thinking, and the sentiment was, okay, Britney's going crazy, right?
Right.
Um, and looking back in terms of the cringe, you can totally see how anyone in her position would have feel a lot of like there'd be a lot of pressure from a mental health standpoint because she couldn't go anywhere without being under a microscope, and that was true pretty much for her entire developmental years. I mean, the paparazzi's level of involvement with her was insane, and it's because, I mean, if they got a candid photo of her, that was worth $1 million, right? So,
Ah,
and anyone could do that, right? It didn't. There's no. You don't have to go to school to follow a celebrity. And this was before the rise of the internet, which is interesting because this problem I think still exists today, but it's a lot less magnified because people post. They basically share their lives with their fans on Instagram. So if somebody's posting hundreds of photos a year, that photo of them walking down the street is not going to be as valuable.
that's a
Um,
great point.
yeah, so I think that's interesting, and even but basically, she couldn't go anywhere without people talking to her, interviewing her, taking photos of her, and she was involved in this dispute. Well, first of all, she had a relationship. Uh, Her formative years, I mean, she was very sexualized, right?
Very sexualized.
That is what is clear looking back from the documentary. It was certainly clear at the time. Like I remember as a kid thinking Britney was really like having a celebrity crush, right? But what I didn't know, and what is weird, like because the media, like the amount of attention she was getting, means that a lot more people than just young kids were interested in Britney in a sexual way. It was like literally everyone, talk show hosts. I mean, there's this whole cottage industry, right? And she had to deal with all of this objectification, right? And you could see where she would develop. I mean, one of the points they made is like she cut her hair because that was her saying that she's basically trying to opt out of this whole objectification thing,
Well, and
right?
she
If I give it a
said, "They won't stop touching me." She
right,
was getting physically assaulted all the time. She had
right,
no boundaries, no space, nothing was respected. And one of the things that you said is important. She came from a family that was unsophisticated.
yeah,
And and it reminded me as I was watching this a lot with very similar to what happened with Justin Bieber. You
hmm
have these, Justin Bieber was born to a single mom and then was taken under the industry's wing
right.
and exploited and promoted all of those things at once, blew up, but then we had to watch him figure out how to become an adult in front of us, and that those were some rocky years. And the same thing happened to Britney. Britney was a young girl. We all make dumb decisions as a young person, but most of us aren't followed around on a daily basis. So
And we
her
don't have access to millions and millions of dollars. I mean,
Right,
I think
right,
that
right. Yeah, you don't
plays a
have the
role in
money, you don't have the power, you don't have the oversight. And so, but we've watched this happen to celebrity after celebrity over time, right? It is not
it.
unusual that Britney went through some rough years.
No,
Um, what's so, nobody took conservatorship over Justin Bieber or Drew Barrymore or
right.
even Lindsay Lohan, who also went through, very public struggles.
I think they did get Amanda Bynes though.
Is she under conservatorship?
Yeah, I don't know if they have the conservatorship, and not to go off on a tangent, but
Yeah.
she's got some kind of there's something in
Limitation.
place.
Interesting.
Something in place there.
One of the interesting things from a divorce attorney's perspective was that it seems like if she wasn't going through a custody battle, she may not have entered into a conservatorship.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
pressure of the custody battle absolutely impacted what she was facing.
Right, and that's one of the first strange points is that because she consented to the conservatorship initially, you have to talk about the timing of that, and I think it's also important, like in this discussion of how she was objectified in the media. I mean, her relationships with men were always scrutinized very, very heavily, starting with Timberlake famously. And she, again, she came from an unsophisticated background. She had portrayed that she wanted to be a virgin until she was married. And then Justin Timberlake, I don't know if you remember, but I remember this. I mean, he basically, someone asked him on the radio, like, "Hey, have you guys had sex?" And he kind of like snickered and was like, "Yeah," And then like, I mean, going through that experience, I mean, the dynamic in her relationships in the media was always probably really uncomfortable. So that translates to she, started dating and got married to and had kids with one of her backup dancers, Kevin Federline. Um, and about the time that she cut her hair, right? She the time she cut her hair, he started raising issues from a custody standpoint. They filed I can't remember the exact timeline. Do you know if he filed for divorce before that or?
She filed for divorce.
Okay,
She asked for sole custody.
right. And
Then
then he
things
responded.
went crazy.
Right,
That's
right,
when things got really, really hard. Now, every move she made with regards to her children was heavily scrutinized. Now she was an unfit mother because she had her baby sitting in her lap in a car.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it just got crazy.
That I think the baby in the car thing I think is worth discussing a little more because it the image looks bad. There's no question about that. Like the snapshot that the paparazzi got of her sitting with a newborn in her lap in a car is not a good image. And I do think that there is, obviously we can't absolve her from any responsibility there. You should not drive with a newborn in your lap. But she was also what the image doesn't show is like all of the paparazzi surrounding her vehicle. She is a concerned mother who's trying to get her child out of a situation.
And comfort a baby. Like,
Right.
anybody who's had a crying, screaming newborn in the back of their car seat. I mean, I've gotten a baby out and held a baby through a car wash, or
Yeah.
driving into a driveway. Like, that doesn't make someone unfit. So the image is bad, but come
Right.
on, that can't translate to losing custody.
No, and the same thing with the infamous photo of her with the umbrella attacking the paparazzo's car. It's the same thing. Is you don't see what came before that. The documentary kind of illuminated that, which is I think very good, and is raising awareness. I think in general about how we interact with celebrities. But all you see is her attacking the guy and attacking the vehicle. I mean, she was having one of the worst days of her life. Her husband or Kevin Federline had basically withheld the children from her, and she there's nothing more important to her than her kids, right? And she's being followed in a harassing manner by the paparazzi. Her family, who's in the vehicle with her, asked them to stop, asked them to leave. It was really rich hearing this guy talk about how they had no idea that she was uncomfortable, and she never asked. He said, I remember him saying, she never asked us to stop, and the interviewer was like, what about when she said, please leave? It's like,
Right.
well, that was just a one day thing, but like she was in a vulnerable state
Yeah.
and they just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And I mean, if you've ever been in a vulnerable state personally, it's very difficult. And imagine going through that with the whole world watching. I mean, that would be an incredible pressure. But Kevin, so these images come out, these little snapshots. She cuts her head, she's attacking the car. Kevin leverages that into go into family court, okay, and she's unstable. The kids need to be protected, and to some degree, like, I mean, if like one thing I was thinking about is if a client walked in our doors and they had a photo of some of these things, or it would be there's a case to be made there.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, you
It's too
know,
easy for us to say, this is absolutely evidence that mom is unfit. And you know what?
yeah,
Maybe she was. Maybe there was some question as to her judgment, as to her ability to care for her children,
right.
but somehow that's translated into, I can't make any decisions for myself ever.
Yeah, and why is it that's one of the things I kept on hearing from her fans is why is this conservatorship still in place? So
Right.
do you want to talk about the timing of like, okay, she's having some of these incidents, and she files for divorce, he asks for sole custody.
It's too easy to get into this trap. And I don't want to gloss over this because we're family law attorneys and our clients experience desperation when they
Mhm.
are going through family court, when they are facing losing their children, when they're unable to have contact with their children. Brittany had two very young boys. It was clear to me that it was and is emotionally raw and emotionally very connected to them. And it mattered very much to her that she was able to take care of her kids and they were taken away from her. And that makes many normal people without mental illness um, experience despair and desperation and something that looks like insanity. Now, we have heard that Brittany's been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. That's never been actually confirmed. We also heard that in the divorce paperwork, he claimed she was a drug addict. What we heard in the documentary was that she went to rehab or a mental health facility for use of Vyvanse, which is a ADHD drug or a stimulant drug. So there's really no evidence that she was actually a drug addict besides that blip of maybe when she was using Vyvanse.
Yeah, I would. So I've thought a lot about this because again, so the Kevin Federline gets the kids. Okay, her father, Jamie Spears, initiates a conservatorship action against Brittany around this same period of time, and that was granted on a temporary basis, right? So at that
Mhm.
point, it was completely temporary. Brittany gets um, gets out of that hearing where it was granted, or she goes directly to. Was she in a facility at that point? She went directly to like the Beverly Hills Hotel, right?
Right.
And met with this really high profile trial lawyer that specializes in conservatorships. And my first reaction is like, why is this guy talking about these things? It seems like that would be prohibited.
It is
But
prohibited.
yeah,
No lawyer is allowed to say, this is what my client or potential client told me. And that is what this man said on
yeah,
camera, which is
yeah,
why I think you said alleged attorney, because attorneys can't do that.
yeah. Well, not only that, but I mean, what was interesting is he describes her coming into the hotel, having a discussion with her. He's trying to have, he's trying to determine whether or not she's competent to accept representation. He makes a determination based on his interactions with her that she is competent, right? They go into court the next hearing together. He's going to represent her. This is her counsel of choice. And the judge, according to him, says, no, sir, you can't represent her. She's not competent to choose an attorney. And what he said is, what he said, the judge said is, look, I've got these medical records here. By the way, I'm not going to let you look at them, but I've got them. And these records make it clear that she's not competent. So rather than letting her choose you as an attorney, which she's not competent to do, I'm the judge, I'm going to appoint an attorney. That to me was insane. It doesn't really make any sense. That didn't make any sense to me as an attorney. Um, and I think if she had, well, I mean, I don't know anything about the representation, but it kind of felt like if she had been representing this guy, maybe things would have gone differently. And that's the guy who said, "Hey, you don't know what don't know. I don't know what was in that paperwork, right? I just have to rely on the court
And
to say."
what do we know? Like we know ethically, we represent people with diminished capacity all the
Yeah.
time. People are still allowed to have representation if they're minors, if they have diminished capacity, if they're experiencing mental illness. So for him to say, for the judge to make that ruling, we don't understand why. And we also have to wonder, like, what medical records are we talking about here and who got the medical records?
Right. Well, another thought that I had watching this whole thing is in terms of the we don't know thing. There's got to be some serious basis for why it was the conservatorship was um, uh, why that proceeding was initiated initially. Otherwise, she wouldn't be in the. I mean, there's just. I mean,
Well,
there-
isn't it possible that her father was opportunistically seeing this as an opportunity to take over, and she saw this as the only way to rehabilitate her current PR situation and see her kids, and she consented, and that was that?
that's possible. Sure, it's possible. But one thing that stuck out to me was her mother. Um, there's a lot to be said about Jamie Spears and his lack of involvement early. I mean, it kind of felt like he just kind of swooped in and was opportunistic. But as far as her mother, everything in the documentary was generally positive about how she's been supportive of her daughter's career and they have a loving relationship. And at one point, I guess she's now fighting to be involved in the conservatorship of Britney's person, and I guess that warrants a brief explanation. There's two parts to this conservatorship. Basically, the conservator has to make decisions about her person, meaning like her medical decisions, her care, and then there's also a financial aspect, like who she can contract with, managing her money, so on and so forth. But what I didn't hear is anything from her mother contesting that there needs to be a conservatorship in the first place. And if she really was, if there was like no support for it, I mean, in my mind, there had to have been some event that we don't know about that is legitimate for how this all started. But the question is, why is it still in place, right?
Yeah, I mean, you run down this rabbit hole and it gets absolutely crazy. I find myself watching all of Britney's videos on Instagram, and we could
Yeah.
even show some of them. They're weird. Like, what's going on in this woman's head? But the thing that really doesn't make sense to me is how she the family court case wrapped up and she was given equal parenting time, 50-50 custody.
Hmm.
And she has, to the best of my knowledge, exercised that up until her father assaulted her child. And then when her father assaulted her child, I think it was Sean Preston, Kevin Federline went and got himself an order of protection. He also handed that information over to the police. And the order of protection was upheld, and Britney's custody was changed from 50-50 to either 70-30 or 90-10. So Jamie Spears' behavior towards her children has now cost her parenting time. And that's just really bothersome to me.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing that is interesting because there wasn't actually that much on that situation. It was like a comment or two in the documentary, so I did a little digging. I couldn't really find where he had challenged the order of protection.
He
Um,
didn't,
he didn't. So
right?
it's which is interesting. I think this warrants a discussion. What I did find is that he's not being prosecuted.
Right. Criminally.
And
Hmm.
yeah, and the prosecutor said, "Hey, look, we did an investigation. We don't have sufficient evidence of criminal charges." Well, I think it's important to explain to people what the difference between an order of protection is in terms of what you have to prove and criminal proceedings. So, um, the burden of proof to uphold an order of protection is extremely low, right? Whereas the burden of proof on a criminal proceeding is beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a very high burden of proof. And so it's hard. I mean, it is entirely possible that an order of protection is upheld, but criminal charges are not pending. are not made. So I don't know if anyone else was interested in that, but I just kind of wanted to explain that. What is interesting to me is why didn't he challenge it? Because we have no idea what happens in these people's lives, right? And we deal with cases where domestic violence is alleged. Sometimes we believe it happened. Sometimes we believe it didn't happen, right? And we pursue that based on the evidence. But I was very curious why Jamie Spears um, didn't challenge the order of protection, because he certainly has the resources to do that. So, uh, it-
Well, let's take it back and take a step back and talk about what happened allegedly.
yeah,
What's been reported? What's been reported is that there was a fight or an argument between, I think, Sean Preston and his grandfather. Now, in the documentary, we hear that, the dad's kind of a jerk, and we see enough clips, home clips, to indicate that he's not an easy man. So, is it odd that a teenager would fight with his grandfather when the grandfather is controlling and domineering? Probably not. So they get in a fight. Sean Preston is running away or leaving or walking away, closes the door, locks it. And the allegation is that Jamie breaks down the door and grabs his neck.
mhm,
Now what Kevin Federline has reported in the family case is that Brittany then did the right thing and removed her children from her father's
yeah,
presence, and that she, made a great choice. That was then reported from Kevin Federline to the police. Now, and the question for the police is, does that constitute child abuse? The question for the order protection is a little different.
Well, I honestly, I think it's the same question. I think it's just different burdens of proof, right? You still have to prove criminal conduct in in uh, in order to protect, at least in Arizona, right? But it's just you don't have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt,
Well,
right?
and it could be a lot of things. Like it could be, breaking down a door in your own house isn't illegal.
Right,
Um, a parent grabbing a kid by their neck isn't illegal.
right,
A third party who's not a parent doesn't really have the right to discipline a child and therefore has probably committed battery.
yeah.
But in a criminal proceeding, proving that beyond a reasonable doubt, how do you do that without a tape, without a video that shows dad, grandpa, grabbed his neck? How do you prove it?
Right, and what's also interesting, this next part is tricky for me because, the other thing I discovered is that when it was announced that there wasn't gonna be a prosecution, uh, Kevin Federline and his attorney and team came out and said, "Look, we're fine with that. Our focus is on protecting the children. The order of protection is in place. That's what it's designed to do." Which I agree with. And they're like, frankly, we're happy he doesn't have to deal with that. We're not trying to pursue prosecution, which could have been one of the reasons why the prosecutors didn't find sufficient evidence. Obviously, if you have cooperating victims versus uncooperating victims, one case is a lot easier to prove. However, so we have this sentiment, hey, we're just trying to do what's best to protect the children. But as you said, Brittany acted correctly by nobody's disputing that. So what harm are you trying to solve by reducing her parenting time? It sounds like we just need to remove the father from the situation in order to protect the children, which is what happened. So on one hand, okay, Mr. Federline, you want to protect the kids, but you're also removing, restricting their mother. You're wanting to restrict their mother's time when there's no evidence that she did anything wrong here.
This makes me so upset, but
Yeah,
it's essentially Brittany cannot get away from her father. She
yeah,
cannot. He has the ability to
literally,
control her. She
literally,
is a child. She's essentially been deemed a minor, unable to make decisions for herself. She does not have the option of creating separation there, but that man has, per the family court, abused her children, and therefore that limits her parenting time. Now, if that happens in a spousal situation, if Jamie and Brittany were married, Brittany could be charged with failure to protect for staying with an abusive man who abused her children.
right.
It's pretty frustrating.
It's very frustrating. I mean, I would think you would need to be able to tie the the misconduct to the restriction, right? Like, for example, if uh, with people that have a drinking problem, right? Oftentimes the court will institute um, alcohol and drug testing orders, right? The idea there is to determine to prevent the harm of the alcohol and substance abuse, right? And to monitor that. But the idea is, hey, if 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 so and so, if the risk is that so and so is going to drive with the children in the car and they're going to be drunk, okay, do we have an emission interlock device? Are we testing regularly? What are we doing to mitigate that risk? But outside of that risk, what is the risk? I mean, courts in Arizona seem to me to take a more nuanced approach to these issues. Again, and the thing about, you can always fall back on this unknown of like, we don't know what Brittany's mental conditions are, but what we do know, right, is that she's very high functioning. And one of the things
Yeah.
that stuck out to me was like, I think I think one of the attorneys referenced her in court documents as a high functioning conservatee, which in the my favorite attorney, the fancy trial lawyer that I mentioned earlier, said, "What does that mean? Like,
High
what is
functioning
a
conservatee.
high functioning conservatee?"
The other thing I just read was that Jamie Spears wanted Brittany to be able to testify in court, and her lawyers were opposed. Her lawyers were opposed and said that lawyers for a comatose patient are able to move forward on behalf of their client, and they should be able to move forward on behalf of their client here too.
Yeah, you're saying Brittany's lawyers didn't want her to
Yeah.
testify?
Yeah.
Okay, so think about what kind of situation would, as an attorney, let's assume they're operating in good faith, right? Because it's not, we can't turn this whole thing, not everyone can be involved in a conspiracy, but like,
But they're all getting paid. They're all getting paid so much money with this conservatorship in place. So part of me does feel like, how can we say that they're operating in good faith when it is they have a conflict of interest? Personally, they're making bank off of this conservatorship. So why do they want it to end?
that's a fair argument, right? But if they were operating in good faith, what kind of but that's the thing, you're right. I mean, in another interesting point just on that before I forget is, she's paying, like in a normal conservatorship, it's like family and friends who are paying for everyone's services because they're really trying to intervene in a person's life who needs help. Brittany's footing the bill for everyone. She's footing the bill for her attorneys, for Jamie Lynn's attorneys, for X, Y, you name it. She's footing the bill for everyone,
Yeah.
and there is a potential conflict
Yeah.
there, and that's what people have really been focused on. But if they were operating in good faith, what what kind? Why would you not? I mean,
Okay. What
yeah,
the question is, why, if we don't assume that they're just behaving this way for money, what other possible reasons could exist for them not wanting her on the stand?
yeah,
Maybe she said she didn't want to be on the stand. Maybe
yeah,
the relationship between her and her family is really complicated and she doesn't want to challenge her father.
yeah. Or maybe it'll become, maybe they think that whatever she wants to say is going to be very damaging to her, which you have a right to get on the stand and be an idiot, but if you have appointed counsel, meaning this isn't like a voluntary attorney-client relationship but appointed, the the parameters might be a little different there. If there's concerns about capacity, right? Like, you wouldn't want, uh, as a criminal defendant, you would have a absolute right to invoke your Fifth Amendment privilege. But if you weren't competent to make the decision to invoke that, that would be interesting. I feel like I mean, it's just bizarre because Brittany is very, like I said, she's very high functioning, and conservatorships are generally for like old people
Right.
who are susceptible to abuse and not are clearly incompetent to make decisions for themselves. One thing I noticed too is the focus on. It seemed to me, because they had this attorney that apparently worked with Jamie. Um, for a couple months, and she couldn't talk specifics because of that, right? She said what you're supposed to say, but she said I can talk hypothetically. And then everything that came after that, which is why I'm paying attention to it, had to do with concerns about people taking advantage of Brittany financially. And so I imagine there had been, I mean, the implication to me was there had been some of that going on in the past, and specifically there's this boyfriend that was apparently, managing her finances and drugging her and all.
Mhm.
I mean, that could be true or not, but still, why is she still on the conservative? I mean, this is somebody who has a Vegas residency. I mean, she's still a superstar, right?
She's a superstar.
Makes
She's
$60 million a year.
Yeah, I mean, she is lots of adults walk around with diminished capacity and don't have conservatorships.
Yeah,
Maybe Brittany is, I don't know. I don't know. And I don't want to be cruel, but maybe she is very easily influenced.
yeah,
Maybe she is immature and, mentally and psychologically a little, young for her age. So what? Does
yeah.
that mean she can't make her own decisions? And aren't there other ways that she could be protected? Let's say she is worried, okay, like because she consented to conservatorship. So aren't there other ways that protections could be in place for her to not be manipulated and abused without taking away all of her rights? Couldn't you put a management team in place? Couldn't you put some of the money in trust? Like, aren't there other ways to handle this?
Yeah, and I think I think so. At the end of it, she was able to get. She was not able to get Jamie removed as the financial conservator, but she was able to get a bank, basically like a team that she selected to be co-conservator with her. What is odd to me is why is Jamie? I mean, well, the obvious question I think you already mentioned. The obvious reason why Jamie doesn't want to let go of this is because he's getting paid. He's getting
1.5%, right? What's
paid.
1.5% a year? What is that? I don't know.
Of 60 million. I'll do the math in real time right here. Hold on. You said 1.5%?
Yeah, that's what the documentary said.
All right.
You know who I do like in this whole thing is the boyfriend.
Yeah.
The
That is
boyfriend seems like a really nice guy, and Brittany seems like she's really happy with him.
yeah, it's $900,000 a year.
$900,000 a
Yeah.
year to
Yeah.
to control your daughter.
Yeah. And another interesting thing though is like what I read is that at the time that the conservatorship was put in place,
Hmm.
Brittany's net worth was like down to like 2 million, 2 or 3 million, and now it's significantly higher. So basically Jamie comes off saying, "Look, I've been nothing but good. This has been nothing but good for my daughter. I've grown her estate. It's all." But what was shocking in that same vein is like in actual court documents, there was one of the attorneys trying to tell the judge that we need to look at this more like a hybrid conservatorship slash business model, which is insane. I mean,
Really
like
disgusting.
what is best for Brittany? Is it to be the richest woman on planet Earth? She would probably rather have her kids than any amount of wealth, I would
And her
imagine.
freedom. Like, how
Right,
much is that worth to her? Maybe she
right.
needs great managers, maybe she needs great influencers, but can't you do that without a conservatorship? Probably.
And
So go ahead.
sorry, and the other thing too is interesting is like once you get power over her, I mean, and you see this, and again, I'm not alleging this is what occurred, but you could see where there's a risk of it. Um, if you want to if you want to control in a lot of abusive and controlling relationships, there's a sense of isolation,
Mhm.
right? And yes, Brittany's a public figure, but it kind of became clear to me through the documentary that they have they have cut out of her life and routine people that were involved in it for years, like the one lady that traveled with Brittany everywhere, like the basically from her hometown, and was her, assistant. Um, she seemed genuinely to care very deeply about Brittany, and she described, look, I was basically managing her day to day affairs. I was intimately involved in her life, and she got relegated to, first of all, the Brittany company didn't hire her, right? Instead, she got hired by a third party company, and she basically gives backstage tours. So like, what do you like? They can control not only what happens in Britney's life, but who she's around,
Mhm.
which is uh, gives makes it more risky that they could be taking advantage of her because they're isolating her.
It's just terrible. I mean, it's authorized abuse,
Mhm.
isolation. I give my teenagers more freedom than Britney Spears has. Like, she doesn't get to make any choices. And her social media, we need to talk about, because the whole world is watching her social media and trying to pick out clues of what she's saying, because she has been silent on all this. And that's weird. Justin Bieber talked about what he was going through. Lots of celebrities have come forward and they express themselves. They feel the need to share. These are public figures who have a relationship with the public, and over and over again we see those people communicate about themselves, and Britney doesn't do that at all. Instead, she does weird dances.
Yeah, she does all kinds of weird things. Like she was talking about why she likes the movie Frozen, and how like one of the sisters was locked away in a tower because she just couldn't deal. It is bizarre. It kind of reminded me of QAnon in a way, of like where people think there's like these secret messages encoded in the things that she's doing. In fact, it's worth stating, there's entire like cottage industry almost just about her Instagram. There's a podcast that is dedicated to her Instagram post, right, and kind of dissecting and overanalyzing her Instagram post. And
It's
that's
easy to do. Like, let's take a look at some of these. Decided to do another Q&A because I heard you all and loved them so much. Also, I realized that I could have at least put on a little mascara or lip gloss. Sorry, it's definitely a different look. P.S. I'm skeptical of the ice cream diet. So we have this
Okay,
kind of
so I heard that a lot of you guys have been writing in and you want to know what my main goals are for 2021. Number one is to meditate more. Number two is to take a cooking class. Number three is to do a Pilates class and actually follow through with the class. And number four is I've got to try this ice cream diet. Okay, so I heard that a lot of you
So-
guys have been writing in and you want to
what do you think of that?
it's just really sad to me because everything that she just discussed has to do with image. And this is somebody that has been objectified since she was a little girl. So it's like I feel like she's not gotten away from that at all. I mean, and that's just really sad. That's like my initial gut reaction to it. But it's weird.
It's weird.
It's weird.
And it's
Um,
easy to look at this and wonder, like, why are you posting what you're posting? Like, what are you trying to say? Like, why are you have sad eyes in all of these pictures, like a trapped human that we all just want to go in and rescue.
and she's talking really fast, almost like somebody who like hasn't had a good meal in a while. When they sit down and have they just scarf it up like as soon as she's just talking really really fast because I want to get it it's like to me it kind of feels like maybe she's trying to get it all out before it gets shut down, right? But I don't know, it's hard it's just bizarre. It's bizarre. I
Do you
don't
think the Free Britney movement is going to get traction?
know. I mean, so I actually, again, I don't know if this is the beginnings of a thought, but the more I thought about the Free Britney movement, the more I don't know. This might be a hot take, but like I thought about what drove her current situation and the paparazzi back in the 90s and the obsession. It's literally just fan obsession with her, right? And I kind of honestly see the Free Britney movement as an extension of that, just channeled in a more positive way. But it kind of makes me uncomfortable a little bit, to be honest, because even even in her on the one hand, if she needs to be freed, then yeah, I'm all for it. But what if she really has serious mental health issues and now she's dealing with all these people who don't know her, that are trying to free. I mean, it just seems like an extension of the same obsession with celebrity personalities. You know what I mean?
It's a good point.
Yeah, I don't know.
But
So I don't know how I feel about it.
the
To be honest.
question is, what if she is severely mentally ill? What if she is?
Yeah.
So what?
Well, imagine what I'm saying is I don't think that the attention would be helpful to her,
Ah.
right?
So
You
I
know?
guess there's two different questions here. For me, it's let's say she is severely mentally ill. I still don't think she deserves a conservatorship. I still think that the conservatorship is being improperly used and she's being exploited because people who are mentally ill still have rights. Unless they're criminals, they still have rights and she should be able to make her own decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with the attorney that says, "Hey, we don't know what we don't know," type thing. I am concerned enough to kind of have my ears perked and be aware, but without knowing exactly what's going on, what has occurred in the past, and what is going on in her world, it's hard to say. I do agree that she should have rights and make be able to make decisions, but is she capable of I mean, conservatorships are there for a reason, and for some people they make sense.
So this
I
is an
wouldn't
interesting
say,
point too. So
yeah,
there is a new documentary that I have not watched on Netflix on conservatorships. And the point of this documentary is that they are wildly abused, wildly unregulated, and that people are, professional conservators regularly exploit the elderly. Like, I think we all need to maybe take a look at this at conservatorships. When are they appropriate? Like, we should be very careful before we go take away someone's rights.
yeah, and it's the same thing with like putting somebody in an involuntary mental hold, right? Like sometimes it's necessary, but it shouldn't be an easy thing to do,
It
right?
shouldn't be easy and it should be temporary.
Yeah.
Many people, um, I say many because many of the clients that I've talked to have experienced a stay in a behavioral health institute and maybe even had a family member involuntarily take them in. Brittany started out with a 5150 hold, which is a temporary hold due to concerns of mental fitness. Now, that's an emergency and it's finite in time. And I have a whole lot more support for that than this long-term concept of losing your rights or being locked up.
Yeah, I don't it seems to me, I don't know enough about it, but it seems to me like the burden shifts when you consent to a conservatorship. Um, which the idea of consenting to a conservatorship, now that I'm thinking about it, is kind of
An oxymoron.
yeah, yeah. I mean, like, okay, you're saying that she can't consent to hire her own attorney, but she can consent to the conservatorship. So, like, and if there's no impact to that decision, meaning like the process for terminating the conservatorship is the same as it otherwise would be without consent, then I'd have less of a problem with it. But the problem is, based on what I understand from the documentary, is that the fact that she consented basically makes it extremely difficult for her to get it terminated in the future because she has the burden of proving
Yeah.
that the conservator ship is no longer necessary. And if she is being taken advantage of, how is she able to do that when she can't even hire her own attorney?
Right. This
I
is a
mean,
big
it's
deal.
crazy.
So she has the ability at this point to petition the court to ask the court to end the conservatorship, and that has not happened. Now, why? Why hasn't that happened? Why do we have her brother in the documentary saying, of course, she's never wanted the conservatorship, but she has never actually asked the court to end it? Why? Is it because she doesn't have the ability to hire her own lawyer? Is it because she doesn't know what to do? Is it because there's too much backlash? Like, why?
Yeah, and if she is, if the reason why it was put in place in the first place is because she's susceptible, and again, this is all speculative, but if she's impressionable and at significant risks of being taken advantage of, well, maybe the conservatorship or the continuation thereof is just an extension of that, because they're providing her with all these kind of shiny She clearly loves being on stage. That is evident. Even now, like but again, she has started saying, "I will not work unless my dad is," which is crazy, because that shows a certain level of competence, right?
It's a decision.
Yeah.
It's a decision that has a real impact to her, and it's like the only decision she gets to make. The only option she has, the only leverage she has is to say, I'm not going to make any more money. I'm not going to work unless unless my dad is no longer in charge of me.
Yeah. It's crazy.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
We're going to keep following this. We're going to see what happens. I really hope that Britney gets free or starts speaking out or starts using her social media platform to not sound so cryptic. Just tell us what you want, Britney.
I know,
Speak
right?
up, speak out. You can do this. If you need to watch our episode on Kellyanne Conway and Claudia Conway, she spoke out. You can too.
Yeah. Oh man, it is interesting, and I hope the situation gets a lot more scrutiny. Um, I was also curious if it's been the same judge on the case the entire time, and how that would have an impact on it. Um,
It seems that her files are sealed and things are getting leaked, and we have to actually doubt the information that we're reading because it is unclear if they're true. Like
right.
where this information is coming from. People are being interviewed, people are giving information, but we don't really have like the best sources, and that's something that we should keep in mind.
Yeah, but to your point, as I'm kind of rethinking things through this discussion, seems like the system in itself requires good faith actors, but if you had bad faith actors, it would be really easy. Like the ecosystem that is created by conservatorship would be really easy to take advantage of,
Yeah,
for especially somebody like for somebody like Brittany, who can foot the bill for everyone.
right. Absolutely. We should scrutinize, we should keep paying attention, and hopefully one day she lets us know where she's at.
Well, according to her, former assistant, she thinks Brittany will speak up one day, and she looks forward to that.
We all do.
Yeah.
Thank you, Darren. We'll talk soon.
Like